Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Fanboy Planet podcast. I'm Derek and Ric, editor-in-chief of fanboyplanet.com, and we have a special guest today, which I think everybody who's watching is aware. So let's bring in the entire group, which is, of course, we have podcast producer and No Man's Role Model.
Hi, Rick Red Cider.
And our special guest today in the center, which we just figured out how to do.
Hi, Win Scott Eckert.
Win, it's so good to have you here. Yes. And so before we get into talking with Win about all things, I say everything's connected. And it turns out Meteor House says the same thing about you, too. That, of course, if anything we talk about on today's podcast that you want to own for your very own, you can't find your local brick and mortar store. Of course, things from Win can be ordered from Meteor House Press. We'll have a link to that showing shortly, as well as EdgarRiceBurroughs.com. And of course, you can find it at Amazon. We may have links as well for bookshop.org. So, be sure to support any one of those ways, although I know the Meteor House Press would very much appreciate a good recommendation. So try. All right. And of course, if you want to join the conversation, both of you are watching this live, I do have a little commentary blog going on the side, so you can write in questions and we'll take them throughout the entire broadcast, as well as, of course, you can follow it at editor at fanboyplanet.com. If you have questions, comments, compliments, criticism, commentary, you just send it in later. We'll be happy to answer on a later podcast, if not today. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fanboy Planet. That's a lot, and I hear that incredibly huge cat purring through this whole thing. That's the story I'm going with. That's what we have. Is there is a 30-foot cat outside of my office right now? Oh my God! It's real. Anyway, so Win, welcome. You have a book that just came out a few months ago, Tarzan: Battle for Pellucidar, part of the Swords of Eternity arc with the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. You've got a book coming out later this year called The Monster on Hold, and I can't even begin to go through your entire bibliography. There's just a lot, and you're everywhere. It seems like I look at stuff. So I want to talk about your origins, because we talked with you at Comic-Con 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't think we really got into what is it about these characters. You've written Tarzan, you've written a variation on Doc Savage, and many others. What is it about them that stuck with you as a kid?
Well, it all really comes back, and I think there's a quote out there: anything from the 70s, blame on Philip Jose Farmer, and I blame it on Philip Jose Farmer. When I was about 9 years old, a family friend gave me a big stack of Doc Savage Bantam reprints and a copy along with it of Doc Savage: His Apocalyptic Life, which was Philip Jose Farmer's mock biography of Doc Savage. It was actually the accompaniment to his earlier book, Tarzan Alive, which was written, very straight as a biography of Lord Greystoke. And we were driving across country back from these family friends that they gave it, and I just read these Doc Savages in the back seat of the car, along with Farmer's biography, going back and forth. And as you probably know, in Farmer's biography of Doc Savage, there are these end papers where he connects Doc and puts Doc into a fictional world, with a lot of other fictional characters. And for some reason, that just really, it was like lightning striking in my brain. And it made me go out and look for all of these other characters and read their books too, including Tarzan. So I actually read the Doc Savage book. I got into Doc Savage before I got into Tarzan. It made me look for Tarzan. It made me look for James Bond. It made me look for the Sax Rohmer books, and on and on and on. And I can't really explain it more than that. It was kind of like a switch clicked in me, and I just loved thinking about how these characters could interact together, potentially interact in a shared world. And it just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, I think it's like we have similar origin stories. My way in was the Devil Genghis, and then his apocalyptic life, because somebody
Yeah.
pointed that out to me at the library. So yeah, and then became a writer and got hooked up with these franchises, if you will, or these universes. So as I just mentioned, of course, you did have a few months ago Tarzan Battle for Pellucidar, and so I have this really good book we reviewed on Fanboy Planet, and we talked with Chris Carey about the Carson Venus one. So when you're a writer in the super arc, as they're calling it, Swords of Eternity, what are the challenges? You're one of several authors in this great epic, this grand tapestry, if you will. What are the challenges and the tools to keep it all straight so you're not contradicting with somebody else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, from my perspective, and I do this for my own books as well, too, even if I'm not involved in a super arc with other writers or keeping something straight. And I also, again, I got to blame this on Phil Farmer somehow, that he kind of put this in my brain. I create fictional chronologies of the characters or the worlds in order to keep everything straight. So I know the history of what happened when, and can then, kind of refer back to it. And so that was kind of my role with the writers working on the super arc. I made a comprehensive chronology of the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, particularly the intertwining series. I'm not going to sit here and say that I've added every single standalone Burroughs book yet to the chronology, although it wouldn't really be that tough to do so when I find
I do what I'm supposed to. Yeah, you're going to do that when you have time.
Sure. I'll keep it's a living document. It's always a work in progress. And if you find a new nugget of information, absolutely add it in. Or if I sit and I haven't read this standalone Burroughs book in a long time. I don't know. I'm just picking one up, like The Cave Girl, right? It's just standalone. If I read it again, I'll make sure that I'm taking a few notes or trying to figure out when it would fit in. And the one of the important pieces of that is to always make sure it takes place before Burroughs put pen to paper and started writing it, because it's like, in order for Burroughs to know about it, it had to have happened first, right? So that's how I approach fictional chronologies. Just like Sherlock Holmes, W.S. Baring-Gould did one of the first chronologies in his biography, Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street. And there's a lot of Holmes chronologies out there, a ton, but his was, one of the first, and one that I go back to a lot. And it all comes down, that Watson had to have experienced the events before he could actually set them down. So you can't set down future events unless there's some kind of science fictional reason for it, for you knowing the future event.
Yeah. So, I think that's really crucial when you look at the way, when someone looks at the way that Battle for Pellucidar was written. You are jumping around. Your novel takes place before the Carson of Venus novel happens. And then there's a short story or a novella in the back that takes place somewhere around there too. You've got Victory Harbin at 12. We had an adult Victory Harbin previously. You're jumping around. Not only that, and I love this because it totally feeds my, I've got to read these, is you've got footnotes to so many other adventures in that. And so that's, my question is, were you forced to reread or just challenged to reread the Tarzan novels? So you're like, yeah, I've got this.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was forced to. I mean, it was, yeah, exactly. It was a pleasure to do so, honestly. And that's my preparation of getting in the world, getting my head in the world, right? Or in the worlds, is to reread as many of them as I possibly can. And just, kind of just absorb that and pour all of that into my brain, let it percolate, and then see what comes out. So for sure, I reread the Pellucidar series twice before starting writing. The Tarzan series I reread once. All 24, 26, however many you want to count them. I count it as 26 because I include Tarzan and the Tarzan twins book, and I include Tarzan: The Lost Adventure, which was completed by Joe Lansdale. So to me, the Tarzan series, the core Tarzan series, is 26. And I was able to pick, pieces and nuggets out of that and go, ooh, I can use this. And, you make a lot of notes, and then you don't use all of them. Sometimes I'm like, you know what, I can't, that would feel forced. So I'm not gonna try to use this piece, but this puzzle piece works perfectly. And I'm gonna slot it in right here.
Yeah. So let's have the serious conversation of you're getting into the head of, well, not the head of, but you're writing Tarzan, a character created in the first half of the 20th century. Most of Burroughs' work is the 20s and 30s. Times have changed, attitudes have changed. What were the challenges for you in writing a Tarzan that's accessible, in particular, to an audience that maybe only knows movies or maybe only knows TV shows or cartoons or something?
Yeah, that's a really, it's tough to articulate. It wasn't as actually hard to do, but it's a little bit harder, I think, to articulate. But my approach was that there is so much good in Tarzan still. Even if you go back and read some of those books, and in some of those books, there is absolutely cringeworthy or worse, offensive terminology, words. And my approach was, let's not turn anyone off, right? I mean, why would I write a book that's coming out in 2020 and write it in such a way that turns off huge percentages of potential demographics? Now, will we ever reach those demographics anyway? I don't know. But why set myself up to actually actively offend them and turn them off, right? There's no need for that. That's not what Tarzan is. That's not what defines Tarzan, in my view. So let's take what was excellent about Tarzan, his heroic character, his love of nature, his love of animals, and let's focus on those, as well as his desire to protect the people that he loves. And he's a hero. Let's play up the heroic aspects. And again, I don't think that there were very many instances in the original Tarzan books where Tarzan wasn't a hero, but there were other characters and tropes and stereotypes involved that aren't necessary in order to support a Tarzan novel in this day and age. And there are other things that can be incorporated that could constitute an entree point into Tarzan fandom. Burroughs already had heroic women in his books, but could we do more with that? Jane was the lead, for all intents and purposes, in Tarzan's quest. She played a very large part in that book, and it's one of my favorite books. Could we see more of that? And I didn't pursue that by making Jane, but I pursued that by making another female character prominent in the book. Could we do more of that? There's no reason that we need to fall back and play to the old stereotypes. That will never change the prior books. But the world has evolved. Tarzan is immortal. He's alive in 2021. I can't help but imagine that he was sophisticated enough and intelligent enough to evolve along with the evolving world that he lives in.
Yeah, there's an end piece note at the end of your novel. I don't think it was something that you had written, but from his point of view, and in my memory, it's been a while. I've been a few months. That even says like his attitude towards the Waziri, it's time for independence, and it's past time,
Yeah.
and it's
That actually was
still,
me. That was me.
you. Then kudos to you, sir. No, I thought just because there were so many different notes and forwards and so forth, and across all these, and I did just get like Victory Harbin kind of rewrites a little bit about not rewrites, but gives you a different view of the Mahar in her from her point of view. It's like that maybe this is the thing now is saying just because Burroughs wrote it this way, that doesn't mean it's actually the way it 100% happened. Just like I'll go back to Apocalyptic Life and let us get into Philip Jose Farmer, who talks about that, like that Doc Savage himself, or whatever his real name was, was complaining about the exaggerations, although it helped build his reputation. So there's always that subjective narrator that we can lean back on. So
right. And I don't mean, and by that, particularly with the Mahars, the big bad of Pellucidar, I don't mean to go back and rewrite Burroughs, and no one could. It's just, as you said, it's a different character's point of view. Maybe, and that point of view is maybe there's an alternative to war. That's it. Right? I mean, what is so horrible about that? Maybe there's an alternative to war. Can we just stop and talk about this for a minute? That's it. That's all that happened. And it's, I don't want to give too much attention to the 1% reactions, because it's 1%, but it's like a few reviews, that brat Victory Harbin, just give me Tarzan killing things. I'm like, well, if that's what you took away from the original Burroughs books, is I'm a man and I like to see Tarzan, a man, killing things. Okay, that's what you took away. That's not what I took away from the Tarzan books.
I mean, there are Star Trek fans who so clearly seem to not understand the mission of the Federation.
Right.
Right. I won't name any, politicians, but there are. So, so let's get into
the Empire was bad, by the way. Just they were,
but they made the space.
They were not the good guys.
Time.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about Philip Jose Farmer, because his work is obviously this shadow. I mean, Edgar S. Burroughs starts it, but then Farmer comes along. What did you say about the 70s? Like it's all Farmer's fault.
Right.
So it's true. I sought out so much too. So you're reading his work, and I think you talked about I don't think we actually named it the Wold-Newton universe.
Yeah, he started the Wold-Newton family, which was like the genetic family that he kind of did the family tree on and gave the history of in the back papers of Tarzan Alive and Doc Savage. And then in the late 90s, I started a website called the Wold-Newton Universe, which is still out there, an extremely primitive website, and I have not updated it in a long time because I'm busy writing. So it's sort of like almost a going back and looking at a slice of history now.
It's such a strange name that it's probably worth explaining what Wold-Newton is and the event.
That origin. 10 words or less. Go.
Okay, sure. So I don't know 10 words or less, but and I just
used them.
1795 December 13th, a meteor comes down, hits in a farm field in a very small hamlet in Yorkshire, England, called Wold-Newton. That's the name of the village. This is a real event. It's historical. It happened. Farmer didn't make this up. And actually, he didn't make any of it up because it's all true. But there were married couples in 2 carriages nearby, and they were affected by the ionization of the radiation of the meteor coming down. basically think of it as, beneficial mutations, right? So they were affected in a beneficial way. And then there was a lot of intermarriage. So, and there were also people who were already heroic who were there, never mind being exposed to the meteor, right? Sir Percy Blakeney, the Scarlet Pimpernel, he was there. And again, he didn't become the Scarlet Pimpernel because of the Wold-Newton meteor. He was already the Scarlet Pimpernel, okay? And other literary characters, Fitzwilliam Darcy and his wife, Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, and so they're there and they get affected and they intermarry and their descendants become heroes and villains of literature, resulting in Doc Savage, resulting in Tarzan, Fu Manchu, James Bond, and so many others I can't name. And again, these were in Phil's Wold-Newton family, never mind other folks like myself who have come along and written speculative articles to make some additions to the family or the universe via crossovers. And
Farmer actually did the genealogy of all this with charts and who married who.
Absolutely. And here's the crux of it, Rick, because of those charts, those genealogical charts and those chronologies that he did the chronological research to see if such and such character was available within the bounds of that character's canon, was available to be married or to, hook up with a character from a completely different canon. So he wasn't violating some other author's canon in that respect. He was very respectful of it because he didn't just say, like, oh, well, Victor Frankenstein can meet Sherlock Holmes and Watson. No, he would never do that because he knew they were from different times. The original Frankenstein, that was in the 1790s, and Holmes and Watson are in the 1880s and 1890s, right? But you see these pastiches and they're chronologically impossible, right? If you adhere to the original books. He adhered to the original books. Then he created this construct, that was obviously in addition to or outside of the original books, but he always started with the originals, and I took that lesson. And so when you see this criticism online and in some of the toxic fandom where they haven't really read and understood what's going on, oh, it violates canon, they didn't know what they were doing. No, we do very deep research to make sure that we've got the chronologies right, and we read the original books painstakingly before we construct our articles and put them out there. Now, is there other speculative stuff out there that goes really wild? Of course. But, the core group of us who have been doing this for over 20 years are extremely research driven about it.
Yeah. So I would say Leave Extraordinary Gentlemen, so clever, film-wise, although the Tom Sawyer actually fits better than you think. Penny Dreadful series that was on Showtime, very fun. But as you point out, that did bother me. Frankenstein could not be, a contemporary of these other characters.
Right.
But yeah. So,
and by the way, I love Penny Dreadful. I love that show. They're doing something different with it. They're even more mix and match without regard to the original, and that's fine.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fan fiction, but isn't it all? Yeah. So when you said that you started that Wold-Newton website, and I realized I have this dim memory of encountering that in the early days of the web and being so excited there were other people that cared. Like, I think long before I even met Rick, and and you said it's all real. I can remember more than one librarian patronizingly nodding when I'd say, "Oh yeah, I want to someday go and find the Fortress of Solitude." 9-year-old Derek, very excited by Farmer telling me it was real. Mm-hmm. So how did you go from, or is this concurrent, running this website originally and then becoming this compatriot of Philip Jose Farmer and becoming now, you're called the official legacy author for at least one of his series, from his notes, I would assume, or half written outlines, so those kinds of things, for Patricia Wildman and more.
Right. So So Farmer Phil became aware of me from the site because Mike Croteau, who's one of my partners in Meteor House, had been starting a fanzine called Farmer File, and we did 15 issues of it. Chris Carey was the lead editor for the first 10 issues, and then Paul Spiteri and I did the edits for the final 5 issues. And this was back in the mid 2000s. So concurrently with that, Jean-Marc Lofficier, sorry, I do not speak French, started a press called Black Coat Press, and he started putting out a yearly anthology called Tales of the Shadowmen, which was meant to take many different characters from public domain and mash them up in crossovers with a focus on French and frankly non-American characters, which required some learning and some lifting there.
Yeah.
And some of them we sort of remade a little bit, like Doc Ardan was sort of a Doc Savage continuation and stuff like that. So that was my dipping the toe into writing fiction. That was my first fiction, and I very much appreciate Jean-Marc giving me that opportunity. Almost concurrently with that, I started doing a bunch of articles for the Farmer File fanzine, and that ended up with an invitation, like out of the blue, from Mike Croteau. He called me up, and it was 2000. I think it was 2005. And he said, hey, I'm going to drive up to Peoria. He was in Atlanta. He still is. I was going to drive up to Peoria and look through Phil's files again over 4th of July, long 4th of July weekend. You want to come? And I was like, it was 2 weeks. I'm like, sure. So I got my ticket and I got on a plane. I didn't even know where I was going to sleep. Got on a plane, went to Peoria, went to Phil and Betty's house with Mike, got introduced. She made, like orange marshmallow jello or something like that, something very Midwestern and very nice and very, very welcoming. And then they said, well, you can look at the files too. I mean, I wasn't quite, sure how that was going to go because they knew Mike and they trusted Mike. But I hadn't been there yet. That was my first introduction. I was like, yeah, you can go down and look at the files. And then they said, well, where are you staying? And I'm like, I'm going to, get a hotel or something. Oh, no, you have to stay here. So, never met them before. Stayed in Phil and Betty Farmer's basement guest room. And Mike and I, the magic filing cabinet, which is what we call it now, all of his files, they were in another unfinished part of the basement, and then the guest room was right there. So we just had, perfect. I think we stayed up until, I don't know, 1 or 2,
I was going to ask, were you able to sleep, or were you just going to...
Almost not. And by that time, I was writing fiction. I was a year or 2 into writing fiction, and with Jean-Marc, and going through the filing cabinet, and I pulled out this file, and it said Pemberley House. And Pemberley House, this has got to be related to Wold Newton, and I'll explain why for your viewers, right? Remember, we can go back and I said at the Wold Newton Meteor event, Fitzwilliam Darcy and his wife Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice were there, right? Well, his estate, Darcy's estate, is Pemberley House. Okay, right. So I pull out this folder with Pemberley House, and there's a manuscript in it. A manuscript of some chapters, I'm not going to say how many, and an outline. And I'm like, none of us knew. Nobody knew this existed. For instance, with Monster on Hold, which we'll talk about soon, we knew that existed because Phil talked about it at 1983 World Fantasy. He read a chapter from it and he described kind of in a verbal outline format. So that was sort of a lost farmer book that people knew about and had always wanted him to finish. This one, he never mentioned it in an interview, and it was nothing. It was like, what is this? Anyway, that turned into The Evil in Pemberley House. Phil was done writing by that point in time. He had retired from writing, and we talked it over several years. I came back a year later. I created a genealogy based on the characters in Pemberley House, and how it interacted with his existing Wold Newton genealogy. And I did all this legwork, in hopes of getting his buy-in for permission to finish it. I shared with him manuscript in progress as I wrote it, the chapters based on his outline, and he gave the approval, and we had the Evil in Pemberley House. So that's very long-winded, more than 10 words, but that's how I got into the. There you go, Ric. There you go.
Yes, mine's still on the shelf behind me. Yes.
That's how I got into that's really how I got into writing the fiction. I haven't really looked back.
And you wrote a second book. Was it also for Patricia Wildman?
Yes.
The title is eluding me at the moment.
Scarlet Jaguar.
Yes, I knew that Ric had that as well. He's got this stack, and I swear it probably is there all the time. It's not just here. But
5 steps away.
But the Scarlet Jaguar, is that was that solo, or were you still?
That was solo. That was solo. In the back of Bantam's Doc Savage Omnibus 13, the last omnibus of Doc Savage books printed by Bantam, Phil Farmer did the afterword. And he had already had Escape from Loki out by that point in time, the first Doc Savage, or Doc Savage Begins. And he had written about other books, other titles that he would like to write in the series. And there were very short, not a lot of information, and he would, in the afterward, there was a title, and then it would be like, Doc fights X, Y, and Z, and that's it. So there wasn't, and one of the titles was The Crimson Jaguar. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to steal that title, because maybe someday we'll find Phil's notes for The Crimson Jaguar, right? Because every time we go back to the magic filing cabinet, we seem to find more. That's why we call it magic. So I don't want to write a book called The Crimson Jaguar and then have us find the notes for Phil's. So in an homage to his title, I called this one The Scarlet Jaguar.
And now you have, because Patricia Wildman is based on kind of the apocalyptic life, but also Jose Farmer wrote this parallel series. Ric, hold them up because I know you have them. So I just want to, say A Feast Unknown, The Mad Goblin, and Lord of the Trees.
Yes.
And that's where it's coming to. Yeah, Ric's going to hold up Feast Unknown, which has the meat. Yes, there's that ace double. Go ahead, flip it over. Yes. With Gray Morrow covers, right?
Right.
And,
right.
And there's more.
There you go. Yeah.
And I don't know, you probably have paintings too. But anyway, I knew it. Anyway, so you got those parallel series, which nothing new had really come out for a long time. And you've got this coming now, the continuation of The Secrets of the Nine, which is his parallel explanation. Do recommend to anybody who's interested to read his books first, but I was so excited when I saw yours, because that's always been this thing of I love this idea of a little more raw, honest, not necessarily for kids. Not that necessarily Doc Savage and Tarzan were all the time. I guess they were in the 30s, and 40s, but now you go, no, that's not really children's literature. But this was a little more. For Feast Unknown, I think was originally. Didn't you say, Ric, it was from an adult press?
It was published by an adult publisher who specialized in slightly more graphic.
And I think my copy was a Playboy Press edition when I was, at a clean, well-lighted place for books, which I totally missed at the bookstore. But so you're continuing that. You've got The Monster on Hold. Let's talk. What can you say about The Monster on Hold?
Sure. So, and again, for your viewers, I'll kind of set the stage a little bit with the first 3 books. Like you said, these are different versions of Doc Savage and Tarzan, called Doc Caliban and Lord Grunneth. As Ric mentioned, the adult publisher for the first book, A Feast Unknown, was Essex House. And, there were a lot of sci-fi writers back in the 60s adding to, filling their bank accounts by writing for some of these adult publishers. They just didn't do it under their own names. And when they approached Phil So I was like, yeah, but I'll just do this. But I'll just do it for myself. And maybe he shot himself in the foot career-wise. I don't know. I mean, he's taken a lot of grief for that book and for Image of the Beast, which was another one that was very graphic. Image of the Beast and Blown. But I think he very intentionally did it. I mean, he was almost the first of the deconstructionists. And if you think about, Alan Moore and Watchmen and all of the kind of deconstructing superheroes, and like, the question is, what would they be like if it was really the real world and they were really real people? How would they behave? How would the world react? But then he kind of took it a step further with Feast Unknown. And I mean, it's incredibly graphic and very sexualized, and that turns off a lot of people. And I get it. I mean, it doesn't turn me off. I think it's hilarious because I think he's actually having a bit of a joke on us. It's so hyper violent and so hyper sexualized that you can't take it anything, but he's just taking the pulp genre to the ridiculous extremes and seeing how far he can push it. And I think a lot of people who get highly offended of that don't see it from that perspective. And then there's also a bit of, well, he must have just hated these characters because he did that. And I'm just like, you so don't understand. He loved these characters, but he was also so intelligent and so creative that he wanted to try his own thing with them. And the 60s were all about experimentation, and he was experimenting.
I have to add to that when I first saw this book in I think it was a B. Dalton Booksellers, I looked at it and I was in there usually haunting the shelves for the new Doc Savage books.
Yeah.
So I'd come across this and it's got the wavy lines and I'm like, going, wow, that guy's just totally ripping off Doc Savage.
Right.
And on top of that, it's like, and Tarzan too. And at that time I didn't care about Tarzan, but it's like, Doc Savage, that's my hero. That's sacred. And I purposely did not pick up the book because of that. I was offended.
Yeah. See? But you grew, right?
Yeah. I think I was 8.
There you go. Some people are still having that 8-year-old reaction. So they're no longer 8.
No, it's been a long time since 8.
It doesn't erase anything about the original Doc Savages, right? Those still exist. They're still there, and I love them. But I love both, right? You can have both. My buddy Chuck, you probably know him online, Chuck Loridans. He says, right from A Feast Unknown, the title, it's a feast, right? Take what you want. It's all there. None of it, it's all good. Take what you want. Don't eat that if you don't want that part, right? But don't ruin it for the rest of us who like oysters, right? I mean,
you should note that these books are not the adult style that Feast of Known is. They are direct sequels to it.
Yes.
But they are not written with the graphic sexuality and over-the-top violence that this is a standard Doc Savage mile-a-minute action story.
But if I remember rightly, it is like a sequel to A Feast Unknown, and so therefore you're carrying forward. Let's talk about your book, The Monster on Hold, which then is the next under a title now called Secrets of the Nine.
Secrets of the Nine. So the 3 books are all about these 2 Doc and Tarzan analogs fighting this cabal called the Nine of Immortals. And they have this immortality elixir, and they've actually been running things on the planet for anywhere from about 30,000 to 50,000 years. That's how good this elixir is, this immortality elixir. And in the beginning, both Lord Grunneth and Doc Caliban are candidates. So, they have fealty to the Nine, and they do the Nine's bidding in exchange for the elixir. And the books are all about, sort of these heroes discovering or coming to the self-awareness realization that they should not be doing this. So their heroic nature overcomes. And then the rest of the books, the second and the third book, are about their ongoing fight to basically kill members of the Nine or people, the other candidates who work for the Nine. All the while they're being hunted all over the world, because the 9 are everywhere. And so that's the first 3 books. The 4th book, which I'm continuing from Farmer's written prose and outline, will jump forward in time a little bit, and it is just a Doc Caliban book. So, I'm sure that I will not be able to resist dropping in a hint about what Lord Grunneth is doing or where he is, a little tantalizing hint. But this is a Doc Caliban book, and in this book we learn that even the 9, there are even entities even more powerful than the 9, and maybe the 9 are even sort of somewhat controlled by entities or an entity. And when I say entity, I mean cosmic entities, unknowable entities that might send you, if you were to descend deep into caverns in New England, might send you gibbering with fear. And so Doc Caliban, kind of becomes aware, and we'll see through the novel how he becomes aware, because this cosmic entity is sort of tapping into him and causing him to have nightmares and visions, and what is reality and what is not reality. And eventually, through the course of the adventure, and this isn't a spoiler, he's going to decide that he needs to go back to these caverns in New England that he made, that go very, very deep, miles deep. And he descended to a certain point in these caverns way back in 1948. It's now 1984 in this novel, but back in 1948, he had this inexplicable adventure. And he went down into these caves, and there were many strange things that happened in this adventure that he never really could explain. Was it the devil? That some people said it was the devil and Satan, and he doesn't buy that. But what was it? And we're gonna learn in this book what happened.
So you're connected, because you actually teased me on Facebook months ago with this name.
Yeah.
It's actually, in a way, also the sequel to that last Doc Savage official novel from Kenneth Robeson, Win Street and Smith publishers, Up from the Earth Center.
Up from Earth Center. That's right. And I want to make clear to all of the Doc Savage fans watching this, this is not the official sequel. This is not a Doc Savage Condé Nast approved sequel to Up from Earth Center. It's a Doc Caliban. If Doc Caliban also in his universe went down into those caverns and had sort of that kind of parallel adventure that Doc Savage had, what would be the explanation for that? So it's farmers. It's a very farmer-esque explanation or resolution to the mysteries in that official Doc Savage novel. So, for anyone who is such a pure Doc Savage aficionado that they're not interested in Doc Caliban, that's fine. This will not ruin this for them. They can come up with their own Doc Savage official-oriented explanations. Although really the only official one will ever be if Will Murray ever, gets the license back and writes an official sequel, that's Doc Savage oriented, or if someone else, other than Will, has that honor to actually write an official Doc Savage. This is not official. It's farmers' take on it, just like the Mad Goblin and Lord of the Trees were farmers' take on those characters.
And you can pre-order it on MeteorHousePress.com.
Yes. Yep, MeteorHousePress.com. We have 2 editions. We're going to have a limited edition hardcover. And the cover for that has already been released. It's a wraparound cover by Mark Wheatley. To this point, we've only released the front of that, so we haven't released the full wraparound yet. Mark has also done some interiors for us. If you're not familiar, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with Mark Wheatley, but Mark did our cover for Meteor House's edition of Farmer's Tarzan and Dark Heart of Time. He's done a ton of Burroughs, as well as Lovecraftian mythos work, and then a whole host of other work, like great comic book work like Frankenstein Mobster,
I love that.
Which I heard is
No, yeah. You know, Mark, I think we shared a booth with him at Comic-Con one year because of Bill Lugosi's Tales from the Grave. So,
cool.
Yeah.
So Mark is a great guy. He's done a great cover for us for the limited edition hardcover. That will be signed by all contributors, including the artists. And then we've got Doug Klauba doing the soft cover. We don't have that one available. We haven't shown that one yet. And again, I've seen the preliminary sketches from Doug, and it's going to be magnificent.
When you're writing as a farmer title, which is in some ways not a knockoff, but an homage to Burroughs and or Robeson, do you try and put your voice into any particular writer? The mind of, like, are you writing like you think Farmer would write this, or writing as you think Burroughs might write this, or Farmer writing as Burroughs might have written this? What's your thought on that?
That's a great question. So when I did Evil in Pemberley House, because it was a continuation from his prose, and we didn't change his prose, except I think I had to change like a date or something in order to make some things sync up. But we didn't change his prose. Then I wouldn't say it was fully conscious. It was a semi-conscious attempt to mirror and sync up with his prose, if that makes sense. I didn't. I don't think that I tried to slavishly imitate it, but I did try to make it as smooth as possible. And Farmer, I've been reading him so long. He's part of the way he writes and phrases things, and his beats and his patterns. I think they're just in me, and I would never say that I am as good as a writer him, or that I write like him, or it's just automatic and I'm just like him. That's not what I'm saying. But there are certain beats and patterns and word choices that I think are just unavoidably in me, because I've been reading him for so long and for just so frequently. And so that I tried to tap into that even a little bit more with Pemberley House. And I'll try that again with Monster, because again, it's got a good chunk of his prose in it. And so I want it to be smooth for the reader. With Burroughs, I did not try to do that. I did not try to write like Burroughs. I did not try to duplicate his prose. However, Burroughs has other patterns, different from beats and actually writing the prose, but he has different things that he does that I did try to give an homage to. So very often he will write dueling storylines and alternate chapters. I did that. That was a no-brainer, right? You don't have to try to figure out how to write just like Burroughs in order to do that, right? So alternating storylines. He has other patterns. He's a romance writer, right? And he other patterns of taking a person, a character, a fish out of water, dumping that character in a completely new environment, and then introducing that male character to a female heroine and having them go through a series of misunderstandings because of lack of communication and anger and, I hate you. And then at the end of the book, no, I love you. Right. I mean, and so I turned that on its head with the female character being brought into Pellucidar and meeting caveman. But reversing the genders with that, but still playing with that Burroughsian trope. Again, I don't claim any special creativity to that. It's kind of a no-brainer to do it. But that was the kind of Burroughs stuff that I wanted to emulate. There were other things that we picked up in terms of extending Tarzan's family tree. that hadn't necessarily been done too much with Tarzan. We had Korok and Miriam, and then we had a mention of Korok's son in Tarzan and the Ant-Man, but that character actually never appeared. It just was mentioned. But, with the John Carter series, we had children and grandchildren. We had Thuvia and Lana of Gothel and all of these. And I'm like, well, it's very Burroughsian to say, hey, it's time for the granddaughter, right, to have a story, right?
Yeah.
And so those were the kinds of things that we were trying to pick up on.
Great. Yeah.
So, would you continue, or are you able to continue the Secrets of the Nine past this? You got to 1984, so it's almost like we're paralleling what Alan Moore, as you mentioned earlier, was doing with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and he ended in 2015 or 2016, I think. So, do you have a plan, or did Farmer have a plan to go further into the future?
I don't know. I don't know that Farmer had a plan. I don't have any indication that he had it planned out or mapped out. Now with Chris's Kokarsa and Opar and Core, there were notes there, and Farmer had a plan, and Chris, I hope will be able to find the time to come back to that someday. So that said, it's hard to say if there would be a fifth book after The Monster on Hold. If there were to be a fifth book, and I'm just admit it right here, it would be, unless I find some notes, it would be whole cloth by me wrapping it up in the best way that I think it could be wrapped up, based on what I know about Farmer and his books. And I will say this, this is a Doc Caliban book. Like I said, I wasn't going to get into Lord Grunneth really very much at all in this book. So we really don't know what he's been doing. And that kind of does cry out for a wrap up, right? We'll see how sales are.
Bubble, you can flip the covers and do that like the original.
Right. I was looking through my notes. Isn't there another Secret of the Nine volume coming out in the bundle books?
Yes. So we're kind of calling that a side story. It's a novella by Frank Schildener, and it takes place in the 70s. And it's a new character, but a character who's kind of been inspired by Doc's and Lord Grunneth's rebellion against the Nine, right? So it's sort of in this world like, well, look, if two guys decided to rebel, maybe they're onto something here. Maybe this isn't so great. Maybe I'll join in.
One can only
yeah, exactly. And he kind of does it in the vein of a 70s men's adventure, but with lots of callbacks to the 30s pulps, sort of with an amalgam type of shadowy pulp hero. Those kind of the shadowy vigilantes, the Shadow, the Spider, the Green Llama, kind of those. It's not any one of those, but it's sort of like, well, if there was one of those types of heroes in the Nine, what would he be like in the 70s, and what would he be doing?
Yeah. So that kind of leads to my big question is you have dabbled with so many different heroes, that both from Philip Jose Farmer and Burroughs, and you've done Honey West, you've done the Phantom, Green Hornet, personal favorite. Is there anybody left that you'd really like to take a crack at? Like, I want to write the James Bond story or something,
that would be a dream come true, but that phone call is never coming because Anthony Borowitz seems to be writing the new James Bonds, and pretty good, I think, taking him back to the 50s. It's probably not. Bill Maynard does such a fantastic job writing the Fu Manchu books. And I don't know if you guys have spoken to him, William Patrick Maynard. And I keep on hoping and waiting that his third Fu Manchu book would come out. I would love to tackle a Romer character. And I know that, looking back, just as with Tarzan, there are some problematic issues going back to Romer and the whole Yellow Peril and everything. And I think Bill Maynard navigates those beautifully in Fu Manchu. in his Fu Manchu books. There's another series character, which was much more minor than Fu Manchu, that Romer wrote 5 books ago about, called Sumeru. And I think an additional Sumeru books would be a ton of fun to write. She's sort of a female mastermind, but it's not. There's no yellow peril trope with it, because you really don't even know what her nationality is or what her real origin is. I think that would be a lot of fun to continue that character. It's probably not what you were thinking of when you asked me, like, when write James Bond, and
no, you gave the answer that I want. But it does spark for me, like, with that, you've done so many of these characters, and I know for like Moonstone, that did dabble with comics as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's where it is. We talked to Christopher Sakara a few months ago in Australia, and I think Chris.
Yeah, I know of him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's doing he's got Fu Manchu comics, so have you thought about going into that, where I think there's a little more flexibility? They're not canon, but but like Dynamite's got a lot of other people writing James Bond.
Yeah. I have not written a comic script, and so that would be a learning curve for me, for sure. I'd love to do it, but to be honest with you, if I were to do a comic, I would love to figure out how to do some kind of farmer adaptation into comics, or I'd love to do, to participate in what American Mythology is doing with their Burroughs comics, and be a part of that. And knock on wood, that might happen. It's I got to finish this Monster on Hold book first, but we've been talking about some things like that.
And there is a farmer coming up, virtual.
Yes.
So online, and kudos for doing that as well, keeping Farmer alive. And Rick just messaged me quietly, like, could there be a new Riverworld book? Maybe Shadow Men on Riverworld? That's not the way he'd say it, but I'm more pleading and naked about that pleading. So are there things like that could come forth? But let's talk about FarmerCon, because
sure.
it just a bit. It's online.
Yes.
It's all things farmer, and I think he is an author who has passed from fashion to some extent. I obsessively check every bookstore I go into to find, because I'd love to say, like, To Your Scattered Bodies Go, to get Riverworld, or Trader to the Living to my son. I think he'd really dig those books, and he's nowhere to be found at a Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. Yeah, in bookstores that are only selling new books, you're right.
He's getting harder and harder to find
bookstores out there. There are still ebooks too, and I think the Riverworld ebooks are still available. World of Tears, Day World series is out an ebook, if I had my druthers and my wish, they would be both. There would be, they would still be in print, as well as, it hasn't been that long. I mean, it was probably 10 years or slightly less that the latest editions of the Riverworld books came out, with the second remake Riverworld movie, made for TV or made for streaming movie.
No,
I know, right?
That didn't actually happen.
I know.
It's like that Flash Gordon series. No, it doesn't really.
We'll always have the book. We'll always have the books.
Yes.
Yeah,
Actually,
I mean, it is. It's disheartening to go in and not find new, farmers still on a new bookstore shelves.
When those last editions came out 10 years ago, I bought them all for my son, who read them.
Yeah, I got them all too. I get every edition that I possibly can to try to support it. For all the good it does.
Okay, so when is FarmerCon? Let's give a little focus there, to just kind of say, if people are interested and they're just discovering all this world, and it's a fantastic world, when is it? Where do they go?
Absolutely. So FarmerCon is, in different times, is usually held in conjunction with Pulp Fest, which is in Pennsylvania, usually in the August timeframe. Due to COVID, we're not unfortunately, FarmerCon is not participating in person with Pulp Fest this year. So our virtual FarmerCon will be online, and it will probably be in October, probably in the first half of October. The way we did it last year, which we did for the first time virtually, was we had on our YouTube channel, we would upload some content, like some book readings and some other video pieces throughout the day. And then in the evening, we would have a giant live Zoom with a lot of fans. And we'll probably duplicate something like that this year. So the Zoom is more of just a cocktail hour, like get a glass of wine or your favorite beverage, or, you know, if you're
careful, we have discovered that our personal bartenders have very heavy hands. So,
and so that just goes on for hours. That went on for hours, and that was great. And we also discussed, like, hey, did you see the reading today? Or, you know, we'll have a panel, like we'll record a panel about the new books coming out and things like that as well, and throw those up on the YouTube channel. It's pretty informal in that regard. In terms, we do try to, you know, just manage the invitation so it doesn't get too big. Or I don't want to say that because I don't want to feel like, you know, we're excluding, but it's also hard to manage a giant Zoom call with tens or hundreds of people. So people who are watching this can message me on Facebook, or they can message Michael Croteau, 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 or Paul Spiteri, Spiteri, Spiteri on Facebook. And you can also go to our Meteor House page on Facebook. That's a good way to get a message to us and ask for an invitation into the virtual FarmerCon, Meteor House on Facebook.
Great. And once again, pre-order The Monster Untold at meteorhousepress.com, and there's more information on FarmerCon there as well. I just saw that go up. Yep. So thank you, Win. I know that the weekends are precious as far as both getting life stuff done when it's not work, and then the writing, you know, so which we are eager to see the next thing from you. So thanks for taking the time. And we did not rehearse our ending, but Rick, you're going to say once again, you can follow us right into editor at fanboyplanet.com. I'm Derek McCaw, editor-in-chief of Fanboy Planet, and you, sir, Rick, are.
Oh, we aren't getting what Win say?
No, you want me to say? Oh, okay. I'll go.
Derek, guest, me.
Okay. I'm in the middle. Sorry. Win Scott Eckert, Tarzan, Battle for Pellucidar, available right now from EdgarRiceBros.com. It's been a pleasure, guys. Meteor House Press for the new books. Thank you both. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm Rick Brett Snyder, reminding you to
use your powers
for good.
Oh my God! And we didn't even warn. We didn't inform when this was coming. No, sorry.